Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters, Lake Michigan Region State-Specific Programming for Wisconsin. I'm Mary Beth Nawar, Education Chair for the League of Women Voters, Lake Michigan Region. This programming came about because for several years, our past president, Krista Grimm, shared her vision for a series of state-specific programs. This programming would focus on topics related to the preservation and protection of Lake Michigan and its watershed, and would be specific for each of the 4 states surrounding Lake Michigan. In order to put this program together, the Education Committee and the Speakers Bureau for LMR surveyed our members from each of the 4 states. What came back, we were trying to determine which topics were most important, which topics did each state consider most important. And not surprisingly, climate change was the top of all 4 states' list, followed by PFAS, invasive species, and coal ash. In addition, Michigan identified Line 5 as a topic of importance. So here we are. Each program will highlight a different state, and tonight our focus will be on Wisconsin. We have 4 speakers tonight. Each speaker will be speaking for approximately 15 minutes. I encourage you, if you have questions, to put your questions in the chat to either Rosemary or myself. I'd like to start out by presenting the president of Lake Michigan Region, Elizabeth Joy Guscott-Mueller. She will also be our first presenter. She's going to be presenting on climate change. Joy Guscott-Mueller is managing partner of Guscott-Mueller Law, LLC in Chicago. Her firm's practice includes environmental, real estate, estate planning, business litigation, and transactions. A member of U.S. District Court, Northern District of Illinois, Federal Trial Bar, Joy volunteers on its pro bono panel representing indigent clients in employment discrimination and civil rights litigation. Joy serves as president of the League of Women Voters, Lake Michigan Region, a 4-state, 56-chapter interleague organization with a mission to protect and enhance Lake Michigan and its associated watershed. A member of the League of Women Voters U.S. Climate Interest Group, CIG, Steering Committee, Joy also serves as chair of the League of Women Voters U.S. CIG Water Team. Past league board work includes service as vice president of program and board secretary for her local league, and service as an issues specialist for the League of Women Voters Illinois Issues and Advocacy Committee. She also chairs the City of Lake Forest Legal Committee. Past community involvement includes service as a Lake Forest Elementary School Board member and in leadership for many nonprofit organizations. Joy holds a BA and JD degrees from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a Master's of Divinity from McCormick Theological Seminary in Hyde Park. Thank you so much for speaking tonight, Joy.
Well, thank you, Mary Beth. We're delighted to be here. And I want to thank Mary Beth, who's not only our board secretary, but also chair of the Education Committee, for her work in making this happen. She's a great leader, and we're so glad that she is part of our board. And I'm delighted that all of you are here with us this evening. And we have a lot of ground to cover this evening. So I won't take a lot of time with introductory remarks, except to encourage you both, you all, to not only join us for the next 2 Thursdays. Next Thursday is at 7:30 Central, and the 29th is 6:30 Central for Illinois and then Michigan state specific programming, but also to invite you to our annual meeting and conference in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and online on October 21st and 22nd. And we hope you will join us for that. We are proud to announce that we have just received confirmation this week that United States Senator Tammy Baldwin, who represents the state of Wisconsin, in the US Senate, will be our keynote speaker. And Lou Ann Burton, who's a speaker tonight, but also chair of the conference committee, has also secured Heather Williams, from an environmental engineer from US EPA, to talk about areas of concern, as well as Russ Green from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So it's a powerhouse panel. We hope you will join us. We're looking forward to seeing you in Wisconsin. There's also an online option, but I think you will really want to be here. It's a beautiful venue, and I think you're going to have a good time when you join us. So let's get started on talking about climate change. And I'm going to share my screen and rely on Mary Beth to tell me if she can see the screen. I can see it.
I can see it.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so, I'm not going to repeat all the facts from the wonderful, outstanding climate change program we had in April of this year. I'm not a Nobel Prize winner like Donald Wuebbles, and I'm not a renowned meteorologist like Tom Skilling, and I'm not a climate scientist and scientist at Argonne National Laboratory, Seth Darling. The way that I view climate change in this context is how climate change is threatening water. Because our mission, of course, is to preserve and protect Lake Michigan. So when we're talking about climate change at a League of Women Voters Lake Michigan region program, we're going to view climate change through that lens. So I also chair the League of Women Voters US water team for the Climate Interest Group. And what I've learned in that experience is that the assumption that water is both available and safe to drink may not be true in the future. And indeed, in various parts of the West, it's true now. They're really struggling to have enough drinking water. Across the US watersheds, there are many impacts of climate change on water. And so there are unprecedented high water levels and erosion in the Great Lakes. And you all may recall that just as early as 2013, they were record low levels. But they are unprecedented now in terms of the high water levels and the extreme weather that causes those. And you have rising sea levels and resulting floods, and you have saltwater intrusion in coastal areas on both the east and west coast. And then we also have growing intensity and frequency of severe weather events. So we have heat waves and rainstorms and hurricanes that all enter into the mix. And here is a slide that I did borrow from Tom Skilling, showing that temperatures are continuing to rise. And so 21 tied 2018 for the 6th warmest year on record. And so when you look at this slide, at least to me, it's very dramatic to see the increase in temperatures across the US. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, otherwise known as the IPCC, they put out a report every year. And in their most recent report, they estimated that most climate change impacts will be connected to water. They said you'll experience those in the form of drought, floods, unreliable water supplies, poor water quality, and of course, we recognize that as Lake Erie and the eutrophication that you can see from the satellite picture. Ecosystem devastation. I also see examples of climate change impacts in the climate change related changes to rainfall. So especially at the US level, in the climate interest group water team, we have people giving reports each month. And in one part of the country, there's water scarcity. They can't get enough of it. The Salt Lake is just diminishing by the day. And then you have flooding and others that's wreaking havoc on the East Coast or in the South. Persistent drought and lack of water stresses trees. And of course, the increased temperatures exacerbate the wildfires that we're seeing in the news. And too much rainfall in some regions causes flooding, and that's made worse along coastlines by level rise. And it also pushes the water table higher. And here is a graph showing satellite data from 1993 to the present that shows the increase in sea level rise. And then the rise in groundwater level impacts things like septic systems, gas lines, building foundations, and more. So you're seeing a septic system here that is sort of breached through the surface of the land as a result of groundwater level rise. And then runoffs from fires and flooding also causes pollution, debris, and contaminates going into waterways, including our drinking water sources. So climate change impacts on Lake Michigan are not very different from some of the country. We have more extreme Lake Michigan water levels, and these higher water levels plus stronger winds and heavier storms really wreak havoc on the shorelines and the surrounding communities. So it results in erosion, beach loss, damage to shoreline residential, commercial, and industrial areas. And it results in risks to communities in Lake Michigan from shoreline sites with toxic materials, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit this evening, and where we get into the state specific nature of what's going on in Wisconsin. So examples of the impact risks for shoreline sites in Wisconsin, these two were identified by the Environmental Law and Policy Center in their excellent report entitled Rising Water. And I commend that to you for your reading. We're a coalition partner with the Environmental Law and Policy Center. You've heard his executive director speak at our 2018 conference. They do excellent work. And they identified these two sites as examples of real impact risks. So Two Rivers wastewater treatment plant, I'm sure many of you from the state know of this plant, and it sits in a low-lying area surrounded by Lake Michigan and the Two Rivers Harbor. And it is vulnerable to flooding and extreme weather. And the risks and threats to Lake Michigan and the surrounding communities due to these rising lake levels and waves are potential for the facility to be surrounded by water, for there to be significant erosion that impacts that facility, sewage contamination as a result of overflows, which would cause fecal coliforms, nitrogen, and mercury to go into the lake. The high lake levels and extreme weather could also cause overflows and wash out primary and secondary clarifiers and aeration tanks and other exposed infrastructure, and also damage machinery and electrical systems at the facility, interfering with sewage processing. So if you were with us last week, one of the significant problems that Indiana has is the coal ash ponds from the coal plants. And of course, when you have that flooding and extreme weather, the high waves can really cause effluent to go into the lake. Similarly, at Manitowoc Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is just 10 miles south of Two Rivers. It too is located on the Lake Michigan shoreline, and it is also at risk of high lake levels and extreme weather events. And the significance of Manitowoc is that it already has a concerning record of wastewater facility permit violations and pollution incidents. They reported elevated chlorine and fecal coliform levels significantly exceeding EPA standards, ranging from 3 to 500% on the different pollutants. And so the risks and threats to Lake Michigan and the surrounding communities due to the rising levels are similar to those with Two Rivers, which is the facility can be surrounded by water. There can be significant erosion and contamination, where again, you're getting these fecal coliforms, nitrogen, mercury overflows, and washout of primary and secondary clarifiers, aeration tanks, and items that result in hampered sewage processing. So obviously these cause a risk to human health because there are populations living right on the shoreline near these facilities. And so we really don't want these things to happen. And I think what's important from the report that we learned was on Manitowoc is they really need to look at their infrastructure and make sure that they're taking care of it and building it up. Another impact of shoreline site risks is Alliant Energy's Edgewater coal plant. And this is a coal plant on the Sheboygan Lakeshore, just south of the city center. And although there are plans to fully retire the site by the end of 2022, of course, there will be existing coal ash that will need to be managed in the future. And while the northern part of the property is on a bluff, and so it is there's less of a risk of a climate change impact on that from the high waves and the flooding. The south portion is low lying, and it's directly next to the lake, and there are retaining walls for coal ash ponds, E&F. However, they're potentially vulnerable to erosion in the extreme weather. And so if these water levels reach 589 feet above sea level, and you can see if you go into the report on the maps how close it is to that, these coal ash ponds could flood and potentially contaminate the lake. And as we discussed last week, coal ash leaches heavy metals into the soil and water, heavy metals such as lead, arsenic, cadmium, and chromium. And David's going to talk about coal ash a little later, but this site poses a risk to Lake Michigan due to the high lake levels and waves resulting from the extreme weather. The site also houses multiple unlined coal ash disposal areas, including 4 slag ponds and 1 coal combustion residuals landfill. And the EPA indicated that nearly all ponds are poorly maintained. And so there's significant risk associated with stormwater and effluents from the fuel tank area, which actually join into the Black River and have, if you look at the report, you'll see that has an impact on the coal ash ponds adjacent to it. So Wisconsin is not immune from the risks related to climate change. In fact, in every part of the country, it has become apparent that 20th century strategies for managing water no longer make sense in the face of climate change. So what can you do? Well, I want us to leave hopeful after this evening. So if you're not already a member, please join the League of Women Voters and encourage your local league to join or renew its membership in the LWV Lake Michigan region. And sign up for the LWV US Climate Change Google group. And you can find that on the US site, and we can also put it in the chat. This is a lively group. They're very interested in climate change and many aspects of climate change. So some folks there's a renewables team, there's the water team, there's an oceans team. There are about 7 or 8 teams. There's a transportation, food, soils, and ags. And if you are interested in climate change, I suggest you sign up for that Google group. You'll get a lot of terrific information. Locally, ask your local legislators and candidates how they plan to use funds received from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So with regard to water management, are they investing in gray infrastructure or infrastructure for are they relying on concrete, or are they relying on things like permeable pavers and native plants and things that contribute to a sustainable infrastructure? And are they evaluating shoreline projects in light of the climate change risks? And then also educate your local officials and community members by holding an educational event on 21st century approaches to water conservation or stormwater management. And here you can see, you can rely on us for resources. You see a watershed model that we have that circulates that you can make use of in your local league. If you reach out to us, we've got information on our website on growing native plants that we developed for that purpose. And we also have our Speakers Bureau. And tonight you're hearing from just a few of the Speakers Bureau members, but we have many. And this is just a sampling of the ways we can help you provide programming to your membership, either in person or on Zoom. And then advocate for your local officials to pass and enforce building permitting codes that encourage sustainability and water use conservation and management appropriate to your local watershed. And with that, I will stop sharing and thank you for your attention. And I am going to turn it back to the next speaker, and you're going to hear from some great speakers going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy. That was wonderful. I appreciate that you highlighted some of the shoreline concerns with the wastewater treatment and the coal plant, and also appreciate the great suggestions you have. Our next speaker is going to be speaking about our forever chemicals, the PFAS group. This is David Mueller, and David G. Mueller is partner in the law firm Guscott-Mueller Law, LLC, with offices in Lake Forest and Chicago. Mr. Mueller has over 30 years of experience in environmental, OSHA, health and safety, and real estate. Mr. Mueller's environmental work has spanned in-house, large law firm, governmental, public interest, and consulting. He has litigated a wide variety of environmental and safety issues before state and federal courts and administrative bodies throughout the country, including CERCLA, Superfund cost recovery and enforcement actions, toxic tort and asbestos suits, insurance coverage claims for environmental liabilities, OSHA citation proceedings and pollution enforcement, variance, permit appeal, and rulemaking proceedings. He has managed major industrial facility closures, decommissioning, remediation, sale, and redevelopment throughout the world. Mr. Mueller received a BS from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment, where he was a member of the National Forestry Honor Society Xi Sigma Pi. He received his JD from DePaul University College of Law and was a visiting student at the University of Illinois College of Law. He is a member of the Illinois, Wisconsin in-house, and federal bars. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Mary Beth. I'm glad you referred to PFAS as a group in the plural, because that is certainly the case. I'm just going to put this. Now, can folks see that? Is that up?
Looks
Mary
great.
Beth?
It looks great.
Okay, great. So what's the problem with PFAS? I'm going to kind of give a primer on PFAS. We're going to learn a little chemistry tonight. And then I'm going to talk about how Wisconsin is addressing the PFAS issue. If I can, lost my cursor. Can you? Okay. What are PFAS? Well, PFAS are per and polychloroalkyl substances, and they're a group. There's almost 5,000 PFAS compounds. So we got to think of them not just as one or two compounds, but as a group. And they have some similar. They're a family, if you will, or multiple families of chemicals. And it's a group of fluorinated compounds, and they're used for their stable, unreactive properties in numerous products, from stain resistance to firefighting foams. I'm just going to show you a molecule, and this kind of is what the common thread, if you will, are these long carbon chains. Those are the black molecules, and then most of these compounds are fully or partially fluorinated, so they have fluorines attached to the carbon. And what that does chemically is the long carbon chains make these compounds very strong. That's a very strong chemical chain. And then because they're almost completely fluorinated, there aren't opportunities for them to react with other chemicals. So they're non-reactive. So they're very strong and they're chemically unreactive. And this has some very special properties. They're chemically and thermally stable. They're water soluble, and they're very mobile in the groundwater, and they have a surfactant kind of property as well. They're slippery. They're slick and slippery. All of these compounds make them useful for many things, but it also makes them what's called recalcitrant in the environment, which means they spread. If they're released to the environment, they spread widely, and they're very difficult to treat and remediate. So for all of these reasons, and the other thing is, from a regulatory standpoint, these were off the radar. They were really not part of the suite of chemicals that people were testing for or even focused on. So due to their widespread use in many different products, their mobility and stability in the environment, and lack of regulation, they're what we call an emerging contaminant. And there's emerging and growing concern regarding them. So, and they're chemically complex too. This is a fact sheet from the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, which is part of the CDC. And what their job is, the ATSDR studies toxic chemicals and active chemicals. And so this kind of shows that there are lots of different compounds, lots of different families, and they're pretty complicated. And the testing for them is very complicated as well. They're difficult actually to chemically test for, and they require special sampling, analysis, and special labs. Not all testing labs can really have the capability for test for them. And because of this, and the fact that we can't use existing raw data sets because they were just never tested for, and it's a different test altogether, we don't know much about them. There's a lot, so our understanding of them is really in the infant stage and is growing. So, and while much of the focus has been on the older long chain compounds, which are no longer made, their short chain replacement compounds may also be problematic. So there's so much we don't know. PFAS were useful and widely used. And there's a pretty dramatic example of PFAS firefighting foam. Because of that thermal stability, that chemical thermal stability, you can throw PFAS firefighting foam onto a 1800 Fahrenheit jet fuel fire, and it will smother the fire. So it's very effective and was widely used. What are some of the PFAS containing products? Well, as I said, they're in firefighting foams, paper and packaging. I talked about that slippery kind of property that they have. Clothing and carpets, think of Scotchgard. Outdoor textiles and sporting equipment, different kind of waterproofing, ski and snowboard wax, nonstick cookware, think of Teflon. Lots of different applications. Interestingly enough, personal care products, shampoos, conditioners, sunscreen, cosmetics, toothpaste, and even floss. So they were also, not only were they made, were they in products, in many consumer products, they were also used in a lot of different industrial and manufacturing processes because of some of these really unique chemical properties that they had. So they're very useful for a lot of reasons. So where are PFAS found? Well, at the chemical manufacturing sites, the place where they made PFAS, PFAS containing product manufacturing sites where they were used, landfill leachate, landfill gases, wastewater treatment plants, sludges filters, military installations and airports, firefighting training location, historic fire areas, fuel terminals, petrochemicals facilities, waste streams, surface water, groundwater, soils, and you and me. California study found PFAS in 9 out of 10 people tested. So they stick around inside and out. So this is just a map of PFAS military sites. It's pretty widespread and quite a few in the Midwest. This is a map of PFAS impacted sites, communities, and water systems. This was put together by the Environmental Working Group. And if you'll notice, there's quite a heavy cluster in Michigan. And that is kind of, the data is probably a bit skewed because Michigan, you probably have that concentration in other states as well. But Michigan was one of the early states to have an awareness and a concern about PFAS. And so they started doing testing much earlier than almost anyone else. So what's the problem with the PFAS? Well, as I said, regulations are being developed rapidly. There was a delay at the federal level for many years during the last administration. So many states went ahead and started to develop their own PFAS regulations. The standards that are being developed are in the part per trillion, which is extremely tiny. Most pollution and contaminants that I deal with in my practice are in the part per million and part per billion range. This is an order of magnitude smaller. So just by reference, a part per billion is basically if you took an Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with water and you put 1 drop of PFAS in that, that would be a part per billion. 1 drop, and so part per trillion is even smaller than that. And so the sampling is difficult and expensive, and it's also highly mobile and persistent in the environment. It is, because of that stable chemical structure, it doesn't break down like some other chemicals do in the environment. It's difficult to remediate. You can't, it's not volatile, not really that volatile. And yet it's very, it dissolves easily in water. And therefore it spreads. So, and the cleanup levels have to be very low. And we're really playing catch up. We're learning something new every day. So this this we talk about in the environmental area fate and transport of chemicals once they're released into the environment. And what we find with PFAS is that their plumes are many times, the groundwater contamination plumes are many times larger than the typical contaminants like gasoline constituents or chlorinated solvents that we're used to dealing with. So they're miles long, and this is kind of an illustration. This is a of the water plume and contamination around the former Oscoda, Michigan Air Force Base. And so just by scale, you can see that large oblong feature is the runway for the airport. And so these are huge plumes that are just miles long, and the hotter area, darker areas are higher concentration, but the plumes go on literally 4 miles. And this was due to firefighting foam. So as I said, they're mobile in the environment. There's a lot of different ways they can move through the environment, move into groundwater. They can be in aerosol form, and then become land deposed through friction and fallout. So what's the regulatory history? The Toxic Substance Control Act, or TSCA, was passed in 1976. It was really designed to address these types of issues, but 62,000 existing chemicals were grandfathered in and didn't go through any kind of meaningful chemical review, and PFAS were among those. So that's really the problem. In early 2000s, the manufacturers of PFAS started to get concerned about the toxicity and the widespread nature of them. And so they approached EPA and negotiated a voluntary ban on manufacture. And since that time, actually, blood levels of PFAS in humans have gone down significantly. So that was a good thing, but there's still a lot of PFAS out there. They're likely carcinogens, and in 2018, the ATSDR actually put out a toxicological profile, and this could form the basis for regulating the chemical. Not a lot happened during the Trump administration. As soon as Biden came in, the EPA issued a PFAS strategic roadmap very early in 2021. So what is that strategic roadmap? Well, EPA is focused on the life cycle of PFAS and getting upstream of the problem, holding polluters accountable, and ensuring science-based decision-making and prioritizing protection of disadvantaged communities. And that's part of their environmental justice focus. So recent US EPA actions have been promising. I'm going to go from the bottom and work my way to the top. December 21st, they increased drinking water monitoring. Clean Water Act, EPA issued a draft aquatic life criteria. NPDES, it was put on the radar screen for water discharge permitting. In June of 2022, $1 billion of bipartisan infrastructure money was allocated to address emerging contaminants in drinking water, including PFAS. Also in June of 2022, EPA issued a first test order under TSCA for manufacturers, which is the first step in developing uniform national testing and toxicity data. Once again, gather the data. Also, 4 new drinking water health advisories were issued in June, significantly lowering them from the early 70 part per trillion level. And then in August of this year, last month, there was a proposal to add hazardous substance designation for PFOA and PFAS, and what that would do is it would put the compounds under the jurisdiction of the cleanup jurisdiction of the US EPA, so that Superfund and RCRA hazardous waste cleanup money could be used. So what is the Wisconsin PFAS experience? Tony Evers, the governor, issued a PFAS action plan pretty early in his administration. They started screening municipal wastewater treatment plants for PFAS. And they had a voluntary drinking water sampling program, so that aiding municipalities, if they so choose to test. Some of them have, and some of them have issues. But very recently, Wisconsin adopted a new surface water quality criteria regulation. This is NR 105. It was effective August 1st of 2022. And what it does is it provides a numeric and narrative criteria for PFAS and PFOA contamination. And what this does, it allows the WIPDES permitting system, Wisconsin Pollution Discharge Elimination System permitting system to start to establish effluent limits for these compounds. So what's the road forward? We've got to collect the data, got to do the science, promulgate the regulations. We need to maximize the value of federalism in the state's roles to date. Some states like Wisconsin and Michigan have moved forward when the feds were not taking action, timely action. Now the feds are catching up, but we really do need uniform federal health-based numbers. And then, we need to bring the PFAS chemicals into the federal cleanup and permitting jurisdiction and treat it like any other contaminant. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. These emerging contaminants, it's hard to keep up. As you mentioned, there's new information coming out every day. And so thank you for highlighting that, and also for highlighting some of the legislation and some of the good news that we're starting to pay attention to these and look at regulating them. So thank you again. Our next speaker is Luann Burton. She's going to be speaking about invasive species. She is a former paraeducator and medical writer. She lives in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where she enjoys sailing and kayaking on Lake Michigan. She was a founder and president of her local league. In January 2017, she was one of the original 5 organizers of the Women's March on Chicago, which drew 250,000 people to Grant Park. And I was there, and it was a fabulous event. She has served on the League of Women Voters Lake Michigan Region Board and chairs the 2022 Annual Meeting and Conference Planning Committee and the Nominating Committee. So welcome, Luann.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Although tonight's programming is focused on Wisconsin, the problem of invasive species is ecosystem-wide. Obviously, organisms in Lake Michigan don't respect the state boundaries that extend into the lake. The US and Canada entered the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement in 2012, obligating each country to prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic and terrestrial invasive species. Let's review the difference between non-native species and invasive species. Non-native or non-indigenous species are not naturally found in the ecosystem. They come from a different country or a different region of the United States. Invasive species are non-native species that harm or have the potential to harm the ecosystem. Since it's cheaper to prevent problems than to solve them, and it's often impossible to eradicate invasive species, preventing the introduction and spread of non-native species is a high priority. "188 non-native species have been identified in the Great Lakes. 64 of those are considered invasive. The graph on this slide shows the cumulative number of established species, starting in 1840 and ending in 2020. The number one source of non-native species is ballast water, which increased dramatically beginning in 1959 with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's leveled off in the last few years. In Lake Michigan, the biggest groups of non-native aquatic species are plants, fish, crustaceans, algae, and mollusks. Other groups present in lesser numbers are worms, bacteria, viruses, and insects. So how are we doing? In 2022, the US EPA and Canada released the State of the Great Lakes Report, a binational assessment of the Great Lakes ecosystem. They rated the rate of new species in the ecosystem as good and unchanging. Ballast water regulations put into effect in 2006 and inspection of transoceanic ships called salties have been very helpful in reducing the number of new species. Between 2011 and 2020, 4 new species became established. They are all zooplankton. Zebra and quagga mussels and phragmites are still spreading, which is concerning. Control measures for sea lamprey have been very successful though, suppressing their population by 90%. We need to be mindful that species can spread within and between the Great Lakes. Here we see an assessment of each of the Great Lakes with Lake Michigan in the second column. The rate of new aquatic non-indigenous species for Lake Michigan was rated fair and improving, which compares favorably to some of the other lakes. The sea lamprey situation in Lake Michigan is good and improving, but for mussels, it's poor and deteriorating. In Michigan, we have a growing population of quagga mussels, more so than zebra mussels. That situation is stable or improving in the nearshore and mid-level waters, but they are moving into the deeper part of the lake, which is concerning. Some recent efforts. The Great Lakes Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Information System, or GLANSYS, which is new, is the only ecosystem-wide resource. It aggregates local and regional data and provides species information, tools, and interactive maps. Last year, Canada adopted ballast regulations for lakers, ships operating within the Great Lakes. They have become effective in 2024. The Great Lakes Carriers Association opposes these regulations, though, claiming they serve no environmental purpose, that compliance is prohibitively expensive, and that they are designed to drive US flagged vessels from the market. Congress asked for a study of the impact on US shipping, but it didn't find any basis for contention. In 2018, Congress passed the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. EPA set standards for this in 2020, but they are not yet adopted. The US Coast Guard will implement and enforce them. This act also authorized the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain Invasive Species Program that was funded at $50 million per year for 5 years. Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funds were diverted for this, which was criticized by those who feel the program should have had its own funding. The act includes the study of tools that minimize the transfer risk of non-native species. Possible improvements to our approaches. It makes sense for the US to align our ballast regulations with Canada's and to improve the alignment and coordination of regional efforts. This chart shows the number of regulated non-native species by Great Lakes states and Canadian provinces, with the dark blue bars representing 2020 numbers. You can see that Pennsylvania is currently regulating the fewest and Wisconsin is regulating the most. The Great Lakes Advisory Board sent a report to EPA this year with recommendations. A lot of the spending for prevention and control of non-native species is allocated for the three most impactful: Asian carp, Phragmites, and mussels. The board recommended spreading the funding around to other species as well. So what about the copy? Asian carp represent 70% of the biomass in the Illinois River. Illinois is rebranding Asian carp as copy, short for copious, which they certainly are, and spurring commercial fishing of copy in the river to reduce the pressure on them to infiltrate Lake Michigan. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is working on a multifunctional barrier as a supplement to what's already in place at the Brandon Road site in Joliet, Illinois. And that's in that graphic there. That $850 million project is still in the design and pre-construction engineering phase. With the Water Resources and Development Act, however, the U.S. Senate increased the cost share of barrier construction to 90%, which is significant because project funding has been a big cause of project delays. The WRDA still has to go through reconciliation in the House. In August, a large Asian carp was captured 7 miles from Lake Michigan and Lake Calumet, which is alarming. Also, Asian carp environmental DNA was detected in Lake Erie in July. Although concerning, no one really knows what that means regarding their establishment in the lake. So in closing, invasive species continue to be a major concern for the Great Lakes. Control measures and study are ongoing and have been effective, and the League supports them.
Thank you, Luann. Thank you for that nice presentation. It was interesting to see that Wisconsin prohibits more invasive species than any other state or province, and also the information about copy. You gave us a lot of reasons why we need to be active as leaguers in trying to get this legislation to help protect against invasive species. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
And our last presenter tonight is David Mueller again. He's going to be speaking about coal ash. So welcome back, David.
Thanks, Mary Beth, and thanks, Luann. That's so we are going to.
Looks good.
Looks good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about coal ash. Coal ash and water, how do they mix? Probably not the best combination. This is kind of a visual. There's some pretty dramatic pictures of coal ash and water and floods and breached lagoons, etc. And when they do mix, it's not a good thing. So what is coal ash? It's a residue, or it's the physical byproduct of burning coal. It's also called, sort of in regulations, it's called coal combustion residuals, or CCR. So I might use that term. So what does it consist of? Well, it consists of fly ash, bottom ash, boiler slag, flue gas desulfurization material, and mercury control waste. So this is kind of a schematic, which I thought was pretty good. I believe this was from the EPA, about how coal ash is generated, where it comes from, and where it goes. So we've got the bottom ash, which is the heavy stuff. We've got fly ash, which is light stuff. And then the fly ash is captured in filters. Also, there's a stage for mercury control waste. And then you have the fluidized gas desulfurization unit, and that's to take the sulfur out. So all these things we're taking out of the exhaust stream from the boiler make up part of coal ash. And so this often gets put into sluice through with water down to an ash pond. There may be a discharge into surface water. It may ultimately end up in a landfill where it can impact groundwater. And sometimes that landfill leachate is managed, and sometimes that is discharged into surface water. So, what is the composition of coal ash? So over 50% of it is silicate, it's sand. And then the rest of it is really aluminum oxides, iron oxides, calcium oxides, potassium oxides, and then trace metal oxides, very small percentage. And when I say trace, I mean less than a tenth of a percent. But that's where some of the problem arises. So a couple of about that in a bit. Coal ash facts. So coal ash is the second most abundant waste in the United States behind household trash. There's 1.5 billion tons of coal ash stockpiled in the US. You know, we have been burning coal for almost 150 years. So we've got a lot of it. So burning 4 to 8 tons of coal produces 1 ton of coal ash, and that really varies with the type of coal you're burning. Some coal creates more coal ash, and some creates less coal ash. But it's still, you can see how these volumes got generated from the days of King Coal. So 52% of coal ash is land disposed in ash ponds and landfills, and about 48%, almost half, is reclaimed or recycled for a variety of uses. And then coal ash is regulated as what's called the sub-D waste, a non-solid waste. Excuse me. So how does coal ash recycling work? Well, coal ash can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used in concrete, basically aggregate for the concrete cement products. And it's interesting, there are actually a lot of benefits from a sustainability and energy standpoint in using it in concrete, coal ash in concrete. The alternative way to make concrete is with Portland cement, which has to be kilned, and the kilning of Portland cement is very energy intensive. And so there's a lot of concerns about that. So there may be a sustainability story here in trying to increase the use of coal ash. Land reclamation, road construction, road beds, foundations. The fly ash, which is that sort of lighter, fluffier stuff, that can go into wallboard as a replacement for gypsum. And there again is a potential sustainability win where instead of mining gypsum, fly ash can be used. And in fact, wallboard manufacturers preferred fly ash to gypsum because it's purer. Concrete products made with fly ash, with coal ash are actually preferable and are actually a harder, better product. And then it's used in agriculture to a lesser degree, and sort of miscellaneous types of reuse. And then there's something new on the horizon. Many people are talking about coal ash as being a source for what are called rare earth minerals. These are sort of these exotic minerals that are often mined in places that are experiencing a lot of upheaval in Africa, and there's kind of a struggle. These are these elements that are necessary for all the exotic electronics that we've been addicted to. So there's some promise there. So what are the environmental impacts? And I'm showing you a picture of a house completely inundated coal ash. And this happened down in Tennessee when a TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, ash pond failed, and which in a catastrophic way, and dumped just hundreds of tons of coal ash into several river systems. Cost $1 billion to clean up. So There are environmental impacts. Groundwater and surface water contamination are a risk. Blowing, dust, and particulate air impacts are possible if it's not properly managed. Catastrophic structural failure of coal ash pond structures and landfills. The TVA failure happened in Kingston, Tennessee. There was another very dramatic one in Eden, North Carolina. These happened in 2008. And so as a result of that, the federal government decided to initiate new regulations. So the environmental impacts, though, that a lot of people are concerned about are trace amounts of heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, boron, manganese, and some of these are toxic, some are less toxic, but they are in trace amounts in coal ash. And the other big problem, environmental problem, is just the huge volumes create real management problems. There's just not a lot of options, and you can't, seemingly it's very difficult to get the economic equation to recycle all of it. Although I will note in Denmark, because they don't have any space for landfills, they recycle 100% of their coal ash, and are rapidly moving to renewables. But historic disposal in unengineered and unlined landfills and lagoons. So what's the regulatory history? This looks like a well-managed lagoon. So historically, coal ash has been treated as a non-hazardous solid waste under the RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. That's the big federal waste regulatory statute. In response to these high-profile catastrophic failures, US EPA adopted new regs in 2015, and they were revised in 2018. It kind of has a phased-in Part A, Part B structure because we're dealing with existing, large number of existing installations already, and so you have to kind of bring them into the regulatory process. The regulations allow for an alternative demonstration for unlined surface impoundments. Basically, an operator can, if they can demonstrate that there's no risk of groundwater pollution because of the unique aspects of the site, they can not be required to line their ponds. Clarification of beneficial reuse. This was a good thing. The regulations clarify what is legitimate recycling. And so with that clarification, it is hoped that there will be increased beneficial reuse and recycling of coal ash. Also, there were the effluent regulation of discharges to surface water were imposed. And both industry and environmentalists hate the rule. And there's one school of thought that says maybe that, and I tend to subscribe to this, that maybe the agency did a good job of balancing all the interests and making everybody mad. If everybody's unhappy, then maybe they hit the sweet spot. We'll find out. There's a lot of regulatory controversy, though, about coal ash. I think the proximity of coal ash storage to surface water, which is necessary for cooling at these coal plants, and the high Great Lakes water levels, I think have, which Joy touched on, have brought these issues to a head. The closure of operating coal-fired power plants and their decommissioning becomes an issue for communities and for the utilities, because as we move out of the coal economy, which we are, and coal is on the downswing, we're going to have to deal with the legacy of burning the coal for 150 years. Many environmentalists and citizen groups want coal ash treated as a hazardous waste, because of these heavy metals. Although it has been heavily studied, and it does not really meet the criteria of hazardous waste. But it does need to be properly managed. So, and then the high profile catastrophic failures. And I think the question for regulators and for society, quite frankly, is what is the best way to maximize beneficial reuse? So let's talk a little bit about coal ash in Wisconsin, because it's a very interesting story. There are about 19 coal combustion power units, power plants in Wisconsin. They've got about 18 tons at 5 plants. WDNR, which is the state environmental agency, has been studying groundwater impacts associated with coal ash for many, many years. Wisconsin regs have been adopted and are more stringent than the US EPA's. They require composite liners, and WDNR can require groundwater monitoring under different particular circumstances. And what's interesting is, due to the stringent Wisconsin regs on disposal, 85% of Wisconsin coal ash is recycled, compared with the national average of 50%. So there is I think Wisconsin is doing a lot right in this area, but I think these issues are going to be in front of people and in front of the public for a long, long time. And so once again, we've got, like in PFAS, we've got this concept of federalism, where federal regulations are great, but states can go more stringent, and they can fit the regulations to the special circumstances of their state. So so that concludes my talk. And this is just an illustration of what happens when coal ash and water mix. It's not a pretty sight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. It's very encouraging to see that if Wisconsin can recycle 85% of their coal ash, maybe we can get the rest of the country to do the same. And there seems to be some interesting possibilities with that recycled coal ash. So thank you to all of our speakers who joined us tonight. We have a little bit of time for questions, and we did have one question come through already. If you're interested in putting a question, please put it in the chat to either Rosemary Heileman or myself. And the first question we have is about home fire extinguishers and whether they contain these PFAS chemicals.
I think it would be unusual. I haven't really looked into that issue, but my understanding of the firefighting foam was that this was actually the U.S. military spec'd this product out in the mid-1960s during the Vietnam War, and it's a pretty specialized product. So I think it would be, although you do find PFAS in a lot of household products, like if you have an old can of Scotchgard lying around, like from the 1970s, which I think I do, in my closet, my utility closet, that probably has PFAS. Throw out all your old Teflon pans, they're all scratched up. Those have PFAS. But I don't want to, I honestly don't know, because I haven't looked into it specifically, but the firefighting foam was for really high temperature fuel fires, in the 1800 to 2000 degree Fahrenheit range. And I just don't know offhand whether home fire extinguishers would have that.
Okay, we have another request. Let's see here.
I have one, Mary Beth.
Okay, go ahead.
Abigail was wondering if David could say a little bit more about what do PFAS do to our bodies?
They're viewed as, they've been classified as carcinogenic, and there are a number of cancers that they have been identified and linked to. And actually, if you go onto atsdr.gov, they have pretty good, plain language fact sheets on all sorts of different chemicals. That's their role in our government. Is one of their roles is to evaluate chemicals and communicate that to people, including the public. So if you want to delve into that, there is some pretty accessible stuff on the ATSDR site and that's true not just for PFAS, but for any if you're interested in learning about toxicity of a particular chemical, that's a good place to try. But yeah.
David, are you saying A-T-Tom, S-Sam, T-Tom, R?
Yeah, ATSDR.
D, so that's a D David before the
Yes.
R. Okay. Dot gov.
Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry.
Okay, I'll put it in the .gov. I'll put it in the chat.
I'm assuming it's that, but you could Google it, as we all do these days.
So what are we Googling then? Agents?
ATSDR, I think it would get you there.
ATF.
SDR.
S
ATS.
and Sam.
S is in Sam.
Okay, I got that. But it's the agency for what?
For Toxic Substance and Disease Registry.
All right, like that in the chat. Do you see it?
Yeah,
Okay,
could be.
there we go.
Okay. We have another question. It says, for the violations mentioned in the wastewater plant in Manitowoc, what is the state or federal EPA doing?
Let's see. Oh, here I am. Okay. Well, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I do know that the plant at Manitowoc actually self-reported these excessive levels that exceeded EPA standards. What I would recommend you do if you want to learn more about this site and its impact in Wisconsin, Google and look up Rising Waters Report from the Environmental Law and Policy Center. And actually, if you Google Rising Waters ELPC, you will pull it up. And maybe if Rosemary is using her handy dandy search tool, she can Google that and pull up the link to that, and we can put it in the chart, in the chat.
I will do that.
Thank you.
And we have one last request, which is whether it would be possible to get some of the PFAS information or charts.
I'm sorry.
Can you publish some of your slides?
Oh, sure.
We could, well, this recording will be posted on our website at the end of the series. So you'll be able to look at it there, and we'll see about getting those slides on the website as well, or at least some of these charts. And then someone had a question, Mary Beth, on if PFAS is a completely inert molecule, how do we know it's dangerous to humans and other living creatures?
I wouldn't say it's inert. It's stable. And it's unreactive. But that it is carcinogenic. So it's not inert.
And doesn't it have implications for groundwater? And it's,
well, right.
And
I mean, it's very soluble in water, so it dissolves easily, and so that's the concern. As it gets into drinking water through groundwater or surface water.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I wanted to thank our speakers. I want to thank Rosemary for helping with the Zoom and running the program, and to everyone for joining us this evening. And I want to remind you, we still have 2 programs. We have Illinois coming up next Thursday, and then we have Michigan the following Thursday. And if you're interested in line 5, we have an additional presentation on line 5 on that Thursday. Keep in mind also, if you enjoyed this program, you can contact us to have any of our speakers come, either to speak to your league, either via Zoom or in person. We have other presentations in our Speakers Bureau. So thank you for joining us tonight.
And
Joy, did
Mary
you-
Beth, the Michigan program is 6:30 Central Time so that the Michiganders don't have to stay up so late.
On the 29th, but
Right,
next week is 7:30.
right.
And
Correct.
Mary Beth, I did want to mention to all of you that if you haven't seen the climate change forum, our 2022 climate change forum, it is posted on our website at lwv.lmr.org. And so take a look at that. Lots of great information in there. And then you can also register for the next 2 programs, as well as register for our annual meeting in October on our website at lwvlmr.org. So I hope you will do that and learn about some of the things we're doing. Thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Have a good evening, everyone.